Okay, peace and poetry, everyone, and welcome to another installment of our CavanKerry Press reading series. I am your host and marketing communications director at CavanKerry Press, Dimitri Reyes, and I am so excited for this evening because we are bringing to you live or post live if you're looking at this on YouTube or Facebook, two brilliant authors, and Dipika Mukherjee and Dianne Silvestri. Today, we will be celebrating the release of Dialect of Distant Harbors, which I'm actually going to screen share my partner in crime, Gabriel Cleveland, just so you can see these beautiful books in the back. Point at them, please, Gabe Cleveland. All right, Dialect of Distant Harbors by Dipika Mukherjee is now available from CavanKerry Press. Please order that book from us if you don't already have it, because distribution is a nightmare. We are sure to get you those books as soon as you place those orders. So think about that. And then if Gabe, you could point at that beautiful blue book, But I Still Have My Fingerprints by Dianne Silvestri. That book is currently on pre-order for the month of October. You can save big by pre-ordering it now, and you could get it before other people have it because they don't have it, but we do. So please consider doing that. Just to let you know, we're going to have a great Q&A this evening, as well as readings from both of these authors. But before that, I am going to kick it over to one of our other staff members, Dana Harris Travado, which is going to talk to us about our land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Dana Harris Travado, and I'm the Director of Development for CavanKerry Press. And I'm so glad you all could make it. We're in for a wonderful evening. But before the reading begins, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey, belongs to the Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. Additionally, we join arts organizations across the country in celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month and in honoring the crucial role of Hispanic and Latinx authors in the development of American literature and culture. We encourage each of you to support a more equitable and inclusive publishing industry by purchasing their work wherever it's published, and not just in September and October, but always. So thank you for that. And I will now hand it back to our Marketing and Communications Director, our fearless Dimitri Reyes, to introduce our readers tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana, for that. Okay, so let's get the show on the road. The tail of the tape this evening, we are going to start with our pre-order celebration with Dianne Silvestri. Dianne Silvestri, MD, is a graduate of Butler University and Indiana University School of Medicine. She was associate professor of dermatology at UMass Chan Medical School until leukemia forced her retirement. She has studied poetry at workshops including Tupelo, Poemworks, and Coleraine, and authored the chapbooks Necessary Sentiments. Her poems have appeared in Journal of American Medical Association, Barrow Street, The Main Street Rag, and Naugatuck River Review, among others. She is a past Pushcart Prize nominee and co-founder and leader of the Morris Poetry Group in Massachusetts. The mother of 4 and grandmother of 7, she enjoys gardening and great ballroom dancing with her husband. And you can find out more about Dianne Silvestri at diannesilvestri.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Dianne Silvestri.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to all of you who are here this evening, who have chosen to listen to us. So my poems in this book, my new book, have come out of the period of time when I was derailed from being a physician practicing and teaching. I went to the doctor one day after my last clinic, and my doctor called me that night and said I had no white blood cells. So we're off here to the races. An early poem in the book is Cosmic Questions. I heard of a man in a Bosnian town who, rather than rant and curse, purchased steel plates for his roof after scientists verified the 6th meteor strike in 3 years. Experts cannot explain this homing of galactic trash to a tiny terrestrial target, nor do they understand why one of my white cells turned killer. As expected, with my diagnosis of acute myeloid leukemia, I had to have chemotherapy. This poem is entitled Chemotherapy and is a bit of a picture of how surreal the experience was. Here on the far side of the moon, it's all dead reckoning. The end of night blown from sight. Shifting infinitude scours away my barefoot prints. I must be transfiguring into heavy ashes for a maroon velvet bag. My only need, a gold braided drawstring. The floor is too cold, too hard to kneel, but hear me, God, hold me. One of the other big transformations for me was from doctor to patient. So this poem is Doctor as Patient. In medical school, we all imagined catching infirmities as we learned them. Addison's, myxedema, every headache, a brain tumor. I'm now awkwardly beached, my white coat surrendered, modesty breached by the gaping leak of the extra large blue gown as students file in. I agree to be their mannequin. Let them interview me, smile and survey, palpate, percuss and auscultate me, because I recall my young stethoscope on early test runs. Now ripped from my role as teaching physician, I body double as teaching case, naked in a snow globe. It's very lonely in the isolation room for a month or so, but I had one friend. This is Poem for George. I've named this special IV pole George, my constant companion in the empty hours through chemo and the eternal waiting. He tirelessly suspends fluid balloons and supports pumps that purr and sizzle like dizzy bees pushing mysteries into me. George is strong to steady my step and sometimes winks his gleam at my gloom. He doesn't object if I push him away when I need some space. Infrequently, his tires accidentally roll over the 3 trailing tubes that hitch us together. He tries to fit his 6-wheeled stance beside the toilet in my narrow bathroom. He's become a friend, even if twice he nipped my ankle, but I understand. My anger slips out sometimes too. This one is called A Bag of Blood. In med school, I reclined once every 3 months on blood bank vinyl as a rocking plastic canister tick-tocked, tapping a warm river that coursed from my open arm. A stress-free deed I exchanged for a stipend of $25 to ease my austere living. Not once making the visit graphic, as if possibly paying it forward. I was fortunate to get a remission after chemotherapy, and then they delivered what they call consolidation, which is more chemo. But they told me that in order to maintain my remission, it was likely that I would need a bone marrow transplant, or what is now called stem cell transplant. So we sought a donor, and I was able to find, or the team was able to find, a matching donor for me. I wrote a poem to him. Dear, healthy 28-year-old man. This is before they would allow me to know who he was. They always wait for a time before they ask if he minds if I know who he is. So this was my imagination. I only knew he was a 28-year-old man. How did you get the idea to be a marrow donor? What prompted you to sign to let them swab your cheek? Why did you take a chance? Somewhere there might be a me. How did you feel when they called to warn you could be a match? Did they ask if you still meant it, still wanted to give yourselves? How did you react when your blood confirmed your chromosome for immunity was the picture of the totem of mine? 10 stripes in perfect match. Did you know about the shots they would give to drive your bones to ache, to make newborn cells to be siphoned, sifted, and shipped on ice to me, longing, readied, and waiting? Whoever you are, will your sacrifice be worthwhile? Once I had the foreign cells in me, hopefully working, and I was waiting to learn of that news. I was trying to figure out who I was, and that was a long journey through many stages, but this poem is called Chimera. The dictionary defines this word as a noun. 1, an organism with tissues of diverse genetic composition. 2, a fanciful or nearly impossible idea. There's a man in my life, nesting in caverns in my bones, pulsing his excursions and navigating forks in my veins, almost as if he owns them. The blood in there I call mine, but its cells wear his signature. I pray this union will work, but worry about a mutiny. I must find a way to persuade the new guy to be my ally. God help the two of me to get along. And through some of the rougher days, this poem I wrote to my husband. It's called Advance Directive. If I don't come home from the light blue walls of this place, it's not that I want to abandon you to do everything alone, but don't forget to replace my voice with yours at the home answering machine. Please take the gourmet cooking class you always said you wanted. And if you resume dance lessons, pretend it is I waltzing with you. During the long process of trying to figure out if I would survive, metaphors kept coming up, and this is one. The name of this poem is Dark Room in the Converted Laundry Room. I'd flash a beam through the negative under the safe light's amber moon, wave to dodge and burn in, then whisk the sheet to the tank to drift in the sour lagoon. Await the black and white dawn, the moment to tong it out, dripping, when I would study the outcome. If it wasn't what I'd imagined, I could always start again. And this is another one. Flashback on a sunny day. The waiter brings me a baseball-sized scoop of vanilla ice cream. From its summit, a slow landslide of viscous, tawny caramel sauce drifts like the same chamois-colored slush inched down a clear tube into my arm from the plump bag of blood-banked platelets hung to rescue me. Finally, I was well enough to accompany my husband to a meeting in Montreal. The next poem is entitled With Feathers. It begins with an epigraph, which is a quote taken from my hospital chart. The patient is at high risk of morbidity from medications, as well as her disease. In Montreal with my husband, I stroll Rue St. Catherine, startled as a sidewalk sweeper flopping his hinged dustpan hops the curb, while the still body of a white pigeon lies beak against the store's wall. Birds that bullet my kitchen windows may ricochet injured, but usually snap up and ruffle, shrug off the stun and fly, alive, maybe one feather missing. I trouble over the on-duty doctor's words in his note about me. Morbidity sounds like mortality. That crimson M drags my neck when I'm trying so hard to fly. And another poem about getting close to resuming life. In fact, the title of this one is, "You may resume your normal activities as tolerated," they tell me, on discharge, but it's hard to re-engage. Quit the cage, go on stage, own my rage. I must hide these mulberry stains, this shearable, translucent skin, tissue thin, plum cushion, battered twin. My inner space, flash fry or cry mode. But worst, my replaced face, unknown phase, fallout trace, sheer disgrace. From cortisone blown wide to a visage I don't recognize. Rude disguise, unsought prize. Close your eyes. A two-eyed, full bulging bowl of yeast risen cheek dough. Snow buffalo, scarecrow, freak show. I howl at this moon. What about you, abductee, addressee, used to be me? I finally did make it to discover what it was going to be like to be a survivor. This was one of my fun poems. Retail therapy. Declared fit to shop for groceries. I heap my carriage with bulging bags, offload bounty to my car, coax my empty cart on the asphalt to surge toward the highlight of the trip. At the return stall, I plunge the cart into the queue in clattering collision, thrust it through the nearest basket's back, then ram the two to engage some strays, grating cacophony, while I assemble those flung pell-mell by odd customers who don't appreciate how good this feels. And I'm going to close with a poem that was another metaphor to me. This comes from an experience on Hagues Peak in Colorado. The title is New Life. Ravenous, sky-struck flames ripped the evergreen cloak from this mountain not long ago. Dayglow draws me to range its meadow to kneel, gather fragments of trunks, charred spicules, still tinged with smoke. I pack them home to loop pink and yellow ribbon through the scorched swirls, to spangle my Christmas tree and remind me of snow buttercups, scarlet paintbrush, silvery lupine emerging from the ruins.
Wow, Diane, thank you. Thank you so much for that. What a gift it was to finally hear you in quasi person, read for us. And thank you for being just so vulnerable and so open with this story. The same way you spoke to us this evening was the same way you spoke to a crowd in public when you were at the New York City Poetry Festival. And I think it was so impactful for you to speak to those you were actually reading to, and for them to kind of get what was happening between the lines by seeing the person behind those lines. So such a gift, such a gift. And I can't wait for the Q&A. I have a few questions to ask you. One of them might revolve around ballroom dancing too, so watch out. It's coming. Thank you so much, Dianne.
Thank you.
Okay, so now, ladies and gents, thank you so much for being here thus far. If you like what you're hearing so far with Dianne Silvestri's book, you can pre-order, but I still have my fingerprints at the link that we're going to leave in the chat or in the description box if you're watching this later on YouTube. It is on sale at a discount until the end of this month. So please catch that before its November release. That will be excellent. Let me actually put Gabe right back on spotlight so he can show you how beautiful this book is. CavanKerry prides ourselves on how beautiful and velvety our covers are. We have French flaps and they're just so, so beautiful. So please consider adding this book to your collection because they're just so, so, so gorgeous. Look at that. Look at that spread. Gabe, you got to show them the French flaps. The French flaps are it. It's where it's at. That's why you publish with us, folks, because of those beautiful French flaps. Thank you so much for that, Gabe. So speaking of beautiful books, we are now transitioning to Dialect of Distant Harbors by Dipika Mukherjee, and we're celebrating this evening. Yay! Put your celebrations and emojis in the chat because this book is released. Dipika, the book is here, and we are so excited and we are so in love with everything that we put out. Just to read you a bit about what this book is about, if you haven't heard of it, a grievous vastness to this world, writes Dipika, beyond human experience. With wonder and empathy and even rage, Dialect of Distant Harbors summons a shared humanity to examine issues of illness and family in the home, as well as redefine belonging and migration in the misogynistic and racist world we all live in. As the world recovers from a global pandemic and the failure of modern government, these meditations are incantations to our connections to the human family, whether in Asia or Europe or the United States, and focus on what is most resilient in ourselves and our communities. Mukherjee is the author of two novels, Shambhala Junction, which won the UK Virginia Prize for fiction, and Ode to Broken Things, which was longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. Rules of Desire is her short story collection. She has published two books of poetry, the Palimpsest of Exile, and the Third Glass of Wine, and received the Liakura Prize, a Poetry Prize in 2016. She teaches at the Graham School at the University of Chicago, as well as Story Studio Chicago, and holds a doctorate in sociolinguistics. And you can find out more at dipikamukherjee.com. And everyone, I am proud, so honored, to throw up Dipika Mukherjee.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for that lovely introduction. Dianne is indeed a hard act to follow. You read so beautifully, and you didn't even cry at any of those poems. I find it so hard to read my own emotional poems without kind of, being a blubbery, sort of tearful, a horrible thing to watch. So I am not going to read anything emotional today. I'm just, telling everyone in advance. But I would like to, again, read from this book. I absolutely love the colors on this. And for my launch in Texas at Book People in Austin a few days ago, I actually tried to get a dress in exactly these colors. And I tried so hard at Macy's, and the people at Macy's in the Galleria were trying with me. So everybody in Galleria got to hear I had a book out. How's that for free publicity? But the colors are just absolutely wonderful, and the book just feels so good. So thank you, CavanKerry Press. I so appreciate having this, beauty that frames my work. Thank you. All right. do not really plan to read for a very long time. I'll give you a sampling of some poems, but I hope that you'll get the book or get my poems in some way and read them. But I would like to begin with the first poem, which is titled Wanderlust Ghazal. Wanderlust Ghazal. My language is a Bedouin thief delighting in foreign sands. It understands the erasure of monks, the ritual of palimpsests. English has no word for Hemonto. No, not autumn, nor winter. No harvest goddess in a veil of mist opaquely drawn. The evening lamp in her hand gleams lambent through the fog. Her voice merges into the howling wind with abundance, desolation. Every year, Mount Kinabalu is still wreathed in monsoon clouds. Cloud messengers may be different, but some still speak of love. Malay Lascars sang of narrow boats with pineapples stacked too high. A grievous vastness to this world beyond human experience. Wanderlust is a disease, incurable. Deep from within it chortles. The light of the moon cannot be rooted, Dipika. Do not even try. So as in any ghazal, the last line refers to my name, and I was named by my father after the light of the moon. And Gabriel, it's interesting that you picked up this line, Wanderlust is a disease, because I was asked about that during my pre-launch. Why is it a disease? And I think, I of course have this wanderlust disease, and I grew up with a father who was a diplomat. So from the time I was 6 months old, I was traveling to Geneva, Switzerland, and then it's just been a constant movement. I think it is a disease because I think it is something that is such a high that sometimes, especially during the pandemic, it just felt so unbearable to be rooted. And I know I have at least one other person watching this, Carolyn, who is also quite a nomad. And it is just something that catches you. But at the same time, I think having lived in many different countries, not as a tourist, but actually having lived and worked in countries like Shanghai, China, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, Singapore, I think that wanderlust is also an exercise in watching failed states in action, because there is not a single country in this world that is perfect. Every nation state is in some way or the other failed or is failing or is on a very steep decline, and you're watching it in horror. So one of the things that I think I do in this book is address some of those issues, because from the problem in Tibet, I had a chance to visit both Tibet as well as where the Dalai Lama now lives. And I think, it's just something that I want to address. And in the US right now, I think, there are various things that poets and writers and activists are all addressing. So I think that wanderlust can be a disease that that makes you think in ways and examine your own life in ways that you perhaps would not if you had very, very deep roots. So yeah, I am going to go to maybe I think keep to Diane's theme really about disease and what it does to the family. I have an elder brother who was in a bicycling accident in 2016, and he has been pretty much non-communicative. The word is not exactly vegetative. He can move his thumb and finger to communicate, but at a very, very basic level. So obviously this took a toll on my family in India, and I have written many poems about that in this book. And what I would like to read out is Ashuk, disease. Ashuk is the word for disease in my native Bengali. And the reason I'm reading this out is that in some way, it seems to speak to people. I didn't realize that a poem that would be about disease would resonate with so many people, but people have been sort of asking for it or talking about it. So I'm just going to share it with you now. Ashuk, disease. Ashuk in Bengali, my mother tongue, is opposite awe of shuk, contentment. Being ill is ashuk. Dis-ease seems similar, but you don't catch ashuk. It catches you until ontologically discontent, you are fevered in bed. Once in a coma, now vegetative, my brother is a 2-year-old dribbling drool, communicating at times with thumb, yes, forefinger, no, raising a middle finger for rude emphasis. He is ashuk, but disease spreads through the house. My mother screams at nurses, the help, the scavenging monkeys. She calls her children murderers. Papa remembers nothing. Another brother holding the fort, managing moods, medicines, neurosurgeons, acupressure, says little until he explodes. We know how martyrs die. I see one in gestation. A maternal aunt was mentally ill. She died beaten and alone. I feel disease coursing my blood. Ashuk waiting, multiplying, malignant, destroying love, all ease, snuffing contentment. All right. Gosh, I mean, it's kind of the evening, and I think I'm getting more and more depressing. So I'm going to just switch the mood really quickly and maybe read something that is a little more upbeat. And this is our goddess season. For those of you who know Indian culture, this is our Navratri, 9 days of celebration of the goddess. And it is a wonderful celebration where the goddess is celebrated in many forms, and it's 9 days of new clothes and good food. And so I have worked a goddess into one of my poems that is titled Migration, Exile, These Are Men's Words. Migration, exile, these are men's words. Women have always been torn up like rice seedlings to be replanted in marriage or another name. My language weeps its wedding melodies in many dialects, many tunes. In my next life, oh God, don't make me a daughter. Exile, migration, what meaning then? I am no woman, poet, migrant in exile. Keep your labels, please. I am not tamed by toil, shoulders stiff with xenophobia, nor a person of color shunted to workshops where grievances grow in collegiality. I am a nomad, homeless, rootless. I am the zephyr, the vayu that breezes past rooted trees. I swish past suburbs, 4-bedroomed homes, theatered basements, the 2-car garage. Nothing stops me as I skim by brooks, snake to large rivers, course by course. I am fed by a hunger sharper than life, to live in this, to suck bare as skin, tender as peeled lychees, always terrified there may not be another rebirth to appeal to. I find my muse as much as she finds me, without home or temple, veena in hand, book in another. In the feminine infinite, we make our home. So the goddess that I refer to out here is Saraswati, the only goddess in the Bengali pantheon, at least, who is unmarried. And she just kind of wanders around with her musical instrument in her books on a swan. And, she has the best life ever. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let's see. I would like to read a poem from Brazil, because I know that it will speak to at least some people here. I'm going to just really mispronounce the title name. I was in Itaparica in a residency called the Sakatar Foundation. And those of you who are writers out here, do look up the Sakatar Foundation in Brazil. They run this most excellent residency where they kind of, put you up for a month, and there are peacocks running around in this beautiful area, and you're free to just swim, and you get wonderful food, and just you get spoiled for a month or so. So I was in Itaparica a few years ago, and this is an island in Brazil. And I wrote this poem, and I'm reading it out to you all now because I think one of the things that disturbs me about the US is what's happening with, oh, thank you, Carolyn, for that link to Sakatar. And I think something that's really been disturbing me is just the rollback of abortion rights. And as a woman of a certain age, I would not, in my 20s and 30s, talk about my own abortion. But now I think I feel... Hello, Tibet House. Hola from Brazil. I think I feel more and more comfortable about speaking about it. And I realize that there really is a need to just talk about it openly and make it something that is open to debate and in a way normal in terms of having this basic right for women. So anyway, without getting on my soapbox, I'm just going to read from it. This is titled, Carolyn, forgive me, Saudade. And I have a little epigraph out there. It's called The Voluptuousness of Misery, and it's by Machado de Assis. In Itaparica, the beach broods. Under cruddy sky, two fishermen and I search waves spitting shells, ribbed green, a crown for a queen, a conch, an obelisk, a walled shell, a thin swell, pink modicum of a disc. I wash the 5 in running water. The pink slithers through fingers. Fragmented, it lingers, disappears. A wound reappears, periodically swelling, voluptuous with reproach. All right, let's see. How are we doing on time, Dimitri? One more poem?
You can read another poem or two, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. All right, so since I see a Tibet house here, let me read a poem about the Dalai Lama and MacLeod-Ganj. One of the things that I am very, very grateful for is that my writing has taken me to these wonderful places and put me in touch with people that I would not have met if I was not a writer. And in 2015, I was lucky enough to be in MacLeod-Ganj and actually meet the Dalai Lama. But I had been trying to do that for many years because my next novel, my third novel, is actually it starts in the voice of a monk about to immolate himself. So I spent many trips I made many trips to McLeod-Ganj, stayed among the Tibetans in exile, and kind of got to know a little bit more about their lives and what they were going through. So at one of those trips, I wrote this poem, and it's titled Keeping the Faith. McLeod-Ganj is hallowed, the Dalai Lama's home in exile. Spirits of British soldiers roam bare churches, while the Himalayan wind drizzles bereavement. Death in exile. Terrible certainties dog Tibet's faithful fleeing to India, leaving family, home, and language for Dharamshala, home of the faithful. Temple bells chime in McLeod-Ganj as prayers float heavenward, spun by hands praying for lost lands, His Holiness. Mandalas center hope, faith is lit by lamps. Bulbul calls, kites ride the breeze. Nothing festive sounds merrily in this place of acute loss. Momo sellers wrapping snacks at the bazaar speak of dead children. Cyclical, eternal nods. Though boots and guns circumnavigate Patola with pilgrims, people dream of holy lakes with ancestors merging with the fish. Okay, I think I'm going to end with a poem that is about food because it always cheers people up. And to get back again, to my statement about writing poetry and novels and taking me places. I hope that this poem which is a poem about writing novels, will take you somewhere else too. And it's titled Damp Red Earth and Pouring Rain. Writing a novel is a lot like cooking a good biryani. First, the manic frying, the heat of cardamom, cinnamon, cloves, bay leaves, star anise, peppercorns. Then set aside. Revise. Onions reborn, caramelized, pungent with ginger garlic, a fragrant, even browning, then the meat thrown into an osmotic simmer. The basmati rice must be just half cooked, mingling warm milk infused with saffron and the essence of pandan, sprinkled rosewater, then a final rearrangement. Gently stir this meat rice, layered yet touching. Out with the spices, hard, embittered, harsh on the tongue. Seal to steam slowly in its own broth, then taste for imperfections. It is merely meat and rice, yes, but what you now hold in your hands will transport you to open fields of saffron blowing in the wind, of damp red earth and pouring rain. Thank you so much. I always like to read this poem because it just, transports me also into food.
Oh my gosh, Dipika, thank you so much for that reading. It was so much fun. You really had some peaks and valleys. You want to talk about when we're looking at manuscripts for CavanKerry, talk about peaks and valleys. You were getting us sad, then you were bringing us back to happiness, and then dipping us in and out. We were traveling the world with you as you were traveling through your own stories and Dialect of Distant Harbors. Speaking of which, Dialect of Distant Harbors, everyone, if you're loving what you're hearing, please order that book from CavanKerry Press and nowhere else. We will get it to you as soon as possible. I will put Gabriel in the spotlight again so he can show you this beautiful book. Get this book that matches that dress that Dipika tried to get when she was in that Macy's down in Texas. Maybe she had to be on Fifth Avenue. in order to get something with that much color and beauty. But please check that book out, CavanKerryPress.com /Dialect of Distant Harbors, and do the same for But I Still Have My Fingerprints, which is in the back there. And look at those beautiful little engravings and etchings that we have into this book. It is really just a work of art, everyone. So thank you so much for that, Gabe. So now we're kicking the Q&A off. So please, everyone, I saw so much nice things that was said about these two wonderful, wonderful authors. In the chat, if you have any questions, I'm going to start a bit of a Q&A. You also do the same, put some questions in the chat. I got a couple of places to start. We ended on this Biryani poem, which felt very musical, and it's in that musical discipline of some sort of ars poetica, you know, something that is about writing. And then Dianne, when we were talking about you and your bio, you and your husband still love ballroom dancing, and You May Resume Your Normal Activities poem, there is a lot of music and certain pacing that's going on in that poem as well. So I wanted to talk to the two of you about how music and rhythm and meter play into your writing. Some of your poems are in form, but a lot of it is more free verse. So how do you traverse the line between doing poems that are more traditional versus free verse? And in that free verse tradition, how do you still have that music and that rhythm and that cadence in your work? Anyone could take that one first. Maybe Dipika, you want to start us off? Wait, let me ask you to unmute.
I think Dianne just unmuted herself in order to reply to that. Dianne, do you want to go first?
No, please.
Okay. All right. I think that for me, of course, there are some poems where you start off thinking, I'm going to write a villanelle today. And sit down and try to do something like that, but not always. I think that with my poem in Itaparika, for instance, it was written in free verse, but after I wrote it, I realized that there's a lot of internal rhythms, and I did not actually sit down to, do that. I think I also come from a tradition. Bengali poetry tends to have a lot of internal rhymes, it's not, and the ghazal also, of course, just keeps rhyming and rhyming and with the same kind of word endings. So I think some of it for me is almost inbuilt, and I do not really like sit down thinking, oh, I'm going to do a sonnet or, whatever else. But sometimes, yes, of course, you do. You think that this topic is going to be something that should sound a little dirge-like. So you want this kind of repetition in it. It really depends. Yeah. Dianne?
I think the music comes often for me after the first writing. That is, I have to get this idea or image or something down and run with it for a while. And when I start to clean it back up or revise it, maybe a day later, maybe a month later, whatever, it starts to fall into the music. I see places where an internal rhyme needs to be used, or other repetition of sounds and things. I really don't often write in actual form, but once in a while something will come out and demands it, so I'll work with that until it can sound natural in the form. Once in a while an instructor or a workshopper says, oh, that's got to be and name some form, but I usually I'm stubborn and don't like to do that. But the exception to all of that is every now and then, as I think happens for most writers, a poem will almost come out completely formed. And that one almost always has its own music right away. It just, just comes out. You wish for more of those days.
Right. Yeah, likewise. I think we all struggle with the idea of saying, oh, I want to write that villanelle or that pantoum today, right? And it just isn't working for that moment. But we can always go back to, there's some sort of natural cadence in music into just like how we talk and how we navigate space, or what we've come to know what poetry is, or what we've read previously, right? So like Dipika, and your discipline with what poetry you grew up on, that's just like ingrained in what you do. And then sometimes we have those happy accidents, right, Dianne? Like you wouldn't necessarily say that there's sonnets or those villanelles in your pieces, but you have persona poems, about like IV bags, right? And you have these elegies and these odes, right? Which just manifest from an idea, and then we see where things go. I think it's really great for young poets to know that sometimes this stuff just happens, right? And that's the magic of it. And speaking of magic, I'll have one more craft question before we get into some other questions from the chat. I like that you shouted out Sakar, and shout outs to all our folks from Brazil and Portuguese, bienvenidos. So you shouted out Sakar, and then Dianne, I also know you spent some time at Poem Works at Tupelo. What do you feel is the importance of going to places strictly just to write, have nothing but waking up and just writing on your mind for a certain amount of time? Because I know we're so distracted with jobs and family and social circles and such. So what is it like, and why is it needed to just have these retreats and have these sessions where you just concentrate on writing?
For me, it takes me out of my cocoon. It's almost like going into a cocoon sometimes. When I write way too long at one time, or work on something way too long. And so for me, the workshops give me other readers who aren't inside that poem matrix. And so I can see where it needs to open up, or where it needs to have a whole section locked out because that's a different poem, or things like that. I think for me, it's mostly a corrective rather than an incubation or stimulation of a new idea phenomenon. I mean, I think there are different types of workshops that emphasize different parts of that. But
yeah, the importance of being around people that are speaking the same language in one space, right? Can see certain things in a certain way, super important. Yeah, thank you for that, Dianne. Topeka?
Yeah, I think, it's an immense privilege to be in a position where you can run off for a month and leave the family and, a job or whatever else, and be able to write. So I also realize that this is, coming from a space that may not be available to everybody. And I don't want to sound, oh, everybody should do this, because obviously when I was a mom with young kids, and you just can't do that. You can't leave, very young kids for a month and do that. So I think very often women come to writing, or rather flower in their writing, a little later, just because of this biological thing where we are like breastfeeding babies and looking after them, and then just pregnant. So, you can't just run off to a new and sort of write a leave place. So I would say that I really started going to residencies in my 30s, when my kids were sort of old enough to be left alone or with their father. And I think that I have sort of grown to immensely value that time and space. Most of my novels, as well as just to take Dialect of Distant Harbors, this was actually finished, the final edits, during residency in Write-On in Wisconsin, which is a 4-hour drive from my home in Chicago. And I took I think it was about 10 days or something off. And I just sat and I looked at these poems, and I looked at the order of these poems. I weeded out the ones that were absolutely terrible and would embarrass me for the rest of my life were they to be published. And I think that, when you are at home, of course you have snatches of time that you build for yourself for writing, but it's not like when you're at a residency. Honestly, when I'm at a residency, I'm incredibly unsocial. I sometimes do not even shower, because I literally just get up and I look at my manuscript, I write, I eat, I sleep, and then I get up and do it again. And this morning I got an email from the person I was with at Right On Residency, because we had some lovely conversations, and she read this when it was still,
Oh, wow.
incubating, and of course she ordered it from you guys, CavanKerry Press,
Good
and she
person.
just had a baby. And so she said, well, I was busy doing this book. She went ahead and had a baby, and it was just so wonderful to have this network as well
Mhm.
that builds around these writing residencies, as so many of us know already. Yeah.
Right, right. And that's excellent too. You spoke about a lot of good things. It's also important for authors to know that everyone moves at a different pace, right? Like life is different for everyone. Everyone has to carve their own path into what benchmarks or what stepping stones they have to hit in order to get to a book or in order to get to a residency. And sometimes other things get in the way. And I think it's important, and I think it's something that we all think about, is that steadfastness and trying to stay in love with the work we do to see what gets us to that next point, until we can get to that point to say, okay, now I have the time that I can go to a residency, or, oh, okay, now I have the time where I'm at Tapello and I'm actually here to workshop with individuals where other people are speaking my same language, right? Those things are super, super important. And everyone gets something different. Like the last time I went to a residency, I have a hard time getting through books, right? So most of my residency I just spent reading, because I just felt like there was a bunch of things I needed to catch up on. And I was antisocial in that way. So there's a bunch of different ways we can cut a residency or some time, and there's no one way to do it. And that's why I love the literary arts, because there's just so many different ways you can come to this thing and reinvent yourselves. So now I'm going to start asking some one-on-one questions for folks, and I'm going to actually start with you, Dipika, since you just spoke. And this one's from Gabe. Can you talk about the importance of bringing human rights issues to the forefront in poetry, and your technique for bringing these big systemic issues down to a personal level so they can touch our hearts and affect positive change? Because you do a tremendous job doing that.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel very good and validated in my work. Because I do, I think the good thing about poetry is that the brevity of it. Yeah, so very often it almost works as an epiphany. You just put it out there. It's one image or one sort of scene almost, and it's done. Whereas I think I write, my novels are also socio-political, and as my younger son was telling me the other day, maybe I'd make more money if I did something a little more popular instead of trying to change the world through my novels. But I think in a novel, it's very easy to kind of get up on your writerly soapbox and say, oh, this is evil, this is horrible, do something. Whereas in a poem, you almost cannot do that, because it is just so brief. You just have to say what you want to, put it out there, and do it in the most the most effective way almost to reach the reader. So you're very conscious about just the constraints of poetry. So I'm glad that Gabe thinks that it's working. But I also feel that for a long time, as a woman growing up in the Indian subcontinent and being a woman of color out here in academia, I felt very sort of silenced in many ways. Even the way that my name was being pronounced, it's only recently that I'm just absolutely insistent on my name being Dipika Mukherjee, whereas I have a nickname called Molly. And when I was in grad school here in Texas, initially everybody used to call me Molly because they just used to otherwise call me Rebecca. And so I just felt that there was a lot of silencing that going on, perhaps that I did not even fully realize at that time, because you're in a new place and you're just like, oh, everything's great, I'm learning stuff, but at the same time you're also having these little moments which make you very uncomfortable. So now some of the things that I am doing is kind of making up for lost time, and just basically being really just upfront about things that I disagree with or I want changed. And I'm just going to say it because I have the mic. I have all these launches and readings and literary festivals that I go to, and people actually ask me about how I feel. And I just lay it out, yes, I mean, I believe in abortion rights. I believe in people should not have to censor themselves in writing, no matter who
Right.
you are, and things like that. Yeah.
Right. No, that's so excellent. And it's funny because when you're in the business of words like we are, right? It isn't until we start seeing that our words are speaking to a wider audience that those things become bigger deals, right? So like before, there's this thing, especially as a person of color, where you just assimilate into just, the Queen's English culture and just be satisfied with that, right? Because that's just what we know. But once we start exploring those different boundaries and start reimagining how we can use language to actually get points across and to talk about, our emotional frameworks and societal things, it really starts opening it up. And I'm really glad that there has been a space, or we've been making space for things such as that within the past 10 years to have this sort of dialogue. So thank you so much for that, Dipika. Dianne.
Yeah, sorry, can I
Yeah.
just interrupt because the people in Brazil are making comments about my name, and I have to tell this anecdote.
Go ahead.
Because when I was going to Brazil for my residency, I got the most hilarious email ever. Dipika, my name apparently in Portuguese means the penis. So they sent me this email saying, unless you want to be called a penis for the rest of your stay here, you might want to consider a change of name. And I said, nope, I'm going to keep the name and just let people deal with it. And so, yeah, that's my little anecdote. Thank you for bringing it up, all you Brazilians. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Stick it to the man. For telling them to just pronounce it anyway. They're gonna have to live with whatever that is, right? You know what your name is.
Yeah.
All phallic things aside, that's my name, right? That's my name. That's perfect. I love it. Thank you. I had to. You know what? I'm glad that you wanted to tell that anecdote, because that's like one of the highlights of the night. I love it. Thank you. I was gonna say, I'll always think about that every time I think of your name, but no, I'm not gonna say that. But I'll always remember this conversation that everyone just witnessed. Oh goodness. Dianne, we're going to you now. This question is actually from Tamara, our social media coordinator. So you write about illness and moving through grief and uncertainty about disease so well. And I myself struggle with writing about my own illnesses. This is from Tamara. So how do you push through and are able to write about your own illnesses in such a candid and vulnerable way?
A good question. I'm not sure I can answer that in a way that would be generally applicable. I think it may be very personal. For me, I read a lot of poems by people who were writing about illness or loss of a loved one, Donald Hall. Things that are where people are expressing something about the disappointment in terms of health. And so that, I think, made me feel freer to write about my health and feel like maybe somebody would even want to read it, so it wasn't just sort of this personal exercise in navel gazing and trying to just log it, I think that really was important. In fact, I have a whole notebook where I collected poems that were very meaningful to me. There is a whole area of poetry about chronic disease now, and I still collect those, so to speak, because I just relate to what those authors are expressing. I suspect part of it is actually being a doctor, because that demystifies sort of what's going on and makes me very curious about what is happening. I always want it to make sense, and that was a very big problem during the course of my 9 years so far, because I think somehow it's a truism that they say medical people, doctors especially, will get the weird things. They'll get, instead of the common thing that's easy to diagnose and treat, they get something nobody can figure out what it is. I have one of my poems I didn't read tonight about the unsolvable mysteries that would happen. And so I was always curious, and that leads me to want to explain things. I was a teaching physician, teaching residents. And so I think that probably played a role in my expressing. And so then it's just a matter of making it get honest, put the heart in it, figure out what am I really feeling about what I'm describing? You know, am I angry? Am I sad? Am I whatever? You're muted. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
It was my turn for it to happen. Yeah, I thank you so much for that, Diane. I do think it's very poignant for us to kind of have a focus point when we're wanting to start writing about certain subjects that we're feeling really deeply about, right? And I think it's great to have a place to start. And for you to have had that book of all of these different poems that are kind of speaking to this story that you wanted to elicit, I think is super important. I actually have something like that. I usually use it for like lecture notes, right? And I call that like a poetry Bible. And I think everyone needs some sort of poetry Bible, something that you could just dip back into and with poems and different notes just to see, you know, throughout your years, because we just learn so much. And thank you for that. I'm going to circle back to that poem about unsolvable mysteries. But the Tamata question about illness and moving through grief and uncertainty of diseases, Dipika, do you have anything you would like to say about that also? Because I know you have a couple of pieces like that as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I was sort of maybe in a different position from Diane because I was sort of looking at it from the outside to something happening to a person that I loved very, very much who is not going to get well. And so I think, you know, there was a lot of anger and a lot of grief, and I was trying to, you know, process all that. And I think writing is just actually cathartic for me. I made sense of this whole process, and I think it got me through a lot of what was happening. There's a poem in this, in Dialect of Distant Harbors, that's called A Question. And my father one day just sort of said, you know, why do you feel that these terrible things that we are reading about in newspapers and all that cannot happen to us? Why is it that you think you're exempt from life? And I think, you know, I had to write about that because I think that yes, it's true that we were going through something awful, but it was also something that was universal almost. It is something, it's a human condition. Everybody goes through grief and loss. So yeah, I think writing for me was catharsis. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Tamara is saying that she's connecting with these answers. So thank you very much. We're getting near the closing of our reading. And thank you so much for everyone that has decided to hang out and listen to this Q&A and offer your insights and anecdotes about wonderful, wonderful stories about names. I was wondering if we could go back and read some encore poems. Dipika, you had an encore poem that someone requested. And Diane, if you want to read something after that also, I know the Unsolvable Mysteries poem is probably something we might want to look into. Dipika, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think Gabe wanted Mountain Echoes.
Okay.
And Mountain Echoes was written when I was in Bhutan. And I don't know how many of you here have been to Bhutan, but it truly is a magical kingdom. And they keep the number of tourists very limited because they want to keep it like a Shangri-La. I was lucky enough to be able to visit there at the Mountain Echoes Literary Festival when my first book was kind of coming out. So this is from that time. Mountain Echoes. In Bhutan, the mountains call with peals of prayer bells, mantras churned by brooks, as pilgrims trek a weary path through the Tatsang Zong, where a holy man soared to heavenly heights on the back of his woman tiger. Legends spring from rocks here of the eternal through ambrosial waters. The Buddha looms large in Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, touching earth, rooted here. Yellow tachas in the red shade of spinning wheels mingle cremated ashes into dusty clay. Flags flutter a rainbow salvation as two little girls, like kittens in the sun, settle next to me on the wide rock. The older speaks haltingly, the younger not at all. Yet we play scissors, paper, stone. They teach me Zhangka, Jimse Do Shoko, grabbing hands to cut, cover, and swallow whole. It's a language of flashing fingers, palms turning black and white, nap ya carp, human babble, jostling in amity. I want them to win, to always reach out with such grace, such openness, to gesture of crows, spiders, horses, to encapsulate a living world in such mellifluous hands within tiny folded palms. Their laughter peals like prayer bells over these sheer cliffs, kissed by moist clouds, drenched in holy waters.
Oh my gosh, that is so rich. And I closed my eyes for your final poem because I've been hearing you read your poems lately. And the last time I really sat with your book in its entirety was when I was reading it, right? In the process of accepting it. And I remember reading it for the first time. It felt like such a tapestry, right?
Yeah.
And I was able to close my eyes and see the movement of art and culture and space and people. And that was what captivated me when we were considering it to begin with. So Dipika, again, that was a gift. And thank you so much for your reading and for being so gracious this evening. We're gonna end with one question with a final question after I hear from Dianne one last time. Dianne?
I will read the one you asked for.
Okay.
I might have to read a really short one after that to kind of change the feeling.
Okay.
This one is maintenance fatigue, and it's the one with the words that you're asking. I give this to Tamara or whoever else might be listening who has chronic illness. Maintenance fatigue. I report back to clinic, forever dawning symptoms, still defiant ones. This cough rocking me like poor clutch work. Spasms lock my fingers like crisscrossed crutches. I lick clapboard lips, blink clapboard eyes, and wait to be wadded up like a crossed off calendar page. My doctors must be ready to abandon the stubborn enigmas logged in my lengthening file for a fresh, solvable case. Although they always smile, I know their smiles could be just carefully taught, not true. So what I'm going to read to encourage after that is the long, hard lesson, but it has a good ending. This is a very dense poem, so I will try to read slowly. Rose quartz geode I found in the woods. It might crack open, that drab, warty stone, if I smacked it hard against a boulder. Might split to disclose a fist-sized cave of sparkling crystals. Flashing beauty, I only later learned, was wrought by sore time and moisture seeping to mingle minerals in hidden space, to squash a stack of what siphoned through cracks, to crush and compact a scintillating marvel in a prolonged, pinching fusion of creation, like the ultimate reward of torment and waiting.
Thank you so much for that, Dianne. And just to sit with these beautiful, beautiful poems. And that's what we're about at CavanKerry. Just the way, Dianne, you started the poems by saying that, you wanted to dedicate this to Tamara or anyone else who is suffering from or living with, I don't want to use that connotative word, but living with chronic illness. And that's what we're about and what we look for at CavanKerry, books that could be dedicated to vast different groups of people, right? Like as soon as I read your collection, I was like, oh my God, this is the next Laurel book we need. And Laurel books are our imprints that explore all the poignant issues associated with psychological and different physical illnesses. And we're just glad to have your collection in the world officially next month. But if you order and pre-order now, you can get it from CavanKerry Press's website directly right before that for anyone else that is still here. So again, thank you so much, Dianne and Dipika. Last question, and you could do this in just a quick 30-second explanation or however long you need, what is one thing you are looking for someone to walk away with when they read your collection? Diane, we'll start with you first, since you just went. So what's that one thing you want someone to walk away with when they're reading your book?
I want someone to, from at least one poem, get the feeling that they're not alone in whatever it is they're suffering with.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And Dipika?
I think gosh, this sounds almost like a platitude, but I really want people to read my collection and realize that, that there is so much wonder and beauty and grace in this world, no matter where you go, that we really are more similar than different.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that being said, that was our reading for our October 4th launch of Dipika Mukherjee. And the pre-launch of Dianne Silvestri. So if Gabe and everyone else, if you could take everyone off mute just so they could say their goodbyes and they could celebrate with us and just clap it up and just give these folks what they deserve. This was just an amazing, amazing reading. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
for coming.
Obrigada.
Thank you, guys.
ধন্যবাদ.
Really powerful. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.